Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, your name and where you live and work?
Yeah, Matthew Scholes. I live in Melbourne, Australia, and I work at the AFL, Director of Education. I'm also a part-time lecturer at Swinburne University, and I also run my own consulting in positive sports coaching.
Yeah.
And I'm also Secretary General of the Victorian Commonwealth Games Association. So a few different jobs, yeah.
Right. And what's your background for doing that?
I've been working in the sports industry in both education and in senior roles for about 15 years. So roles such as I was head of Athletics Victoria, did the training for the World Swimming Championships for all the 2,000 volunteers and staff, run major events, but also I'm a qualified teacher, and I've run lots of different courses, sports courses around Australia.
Yeah. And how did you get into coaching?
Well, I suppose coaching is embedded in all aspects of sports. So I'm from a sports context, so coaching is in every aspect we do. We're always dealing with coaches, we're dealing with the athletes themselves, and coaching is integral in retaining kids in sport. Coaching is integral in team performance, and so you're sort of always involved in coaching.
Right.
And so as I start to look at positive psychology, I start to look at actually dealing with the coaches, because kind of think they're either the solution or the problem.
Yeah.
So we're looking at sort of changing that from that point of view. In some ways, sports coaching is really modern. In some ways, sports coaching is really old-fashioned.
Yeah.
And trying to bring that all up to perhaps a different approach. Coaches tend to look at what someone did in the 1950s or 30s and really admire that, and they did a great job, but does it suit now, and is it the best and most effective way of getting performance out of teams? And I'm of the view that no, it isn't, and I'm of the view that many coaches don't train to be coaches, they just become coaches in sport, and that we need to change their frame of reference and look at it more a positive, strength-based approach. So that's what I've been trying to do, yeah.
Right. So did you just become a coach, or did you train to become a coach?
Well, I suppose I coach a little bit here and there in sports because I play sports, and I've trained a qualified athletics coach, track and field coach, but I'm not heavily, my job isn't coaching, my job is education predominantly and management, yeah.
Right.
So I more observe the coaches and look at it, but
And positive psychology, how did you get into that?
Well, I was looking at positive psychology in education and the way we manage students, and looking at a whole lot of theory in that. So I was working with University of Melbourne, associate professor there, who is an expert in sort of positive education, and just the way they manage students and the way performance and well-being's increased. I just thought this has just got to be in sport. It's so intuitive. It's what we kind of think we should be doing, but we're not always doing it. And so then I had a look at, so I used that research and I had a look at that, and then I went and had a look at the sports research out there by Martin Seligman and others, and it's all there. There's whole lots of research all around. It's just compelling. But then I went, how do we use it? Which I think is one of the things you were talking about. How do we use it? And there's no guide to how we use it. If you're a coach, a sports coach, from varying degrees of education backgrounds, you need to just say, how do I do this? How do I do this? And to do it, the next thing I identified is you've got to do it consistently. You can't just take one bit of research and do that one bit. That's not going to work. You've really got to infuse the whole sports organisation. So I'm really looking at I suppose what I call the 4 pillars of a sports organisation. So I look at the coaches, the athletes, the administrators and the supporters, or the parents if you're at a school, and really looking at changing the whole environment and doing it consistently the whole time. People are very good at being positive when you're winning,
yeah, and
early in the season or early in the game, but when your pressure's on, I've looked at creating models to follow that you'll follow them under pressure. So we've got to change behaviours, and we've got to get it learning a sporting technique. You've got to practice it and practice it correctly, and you've got to do it correctly every time. If you do it incorrectly, you unlearn so quickly. So sort of looking at it on those lines, yeah. So it's been really interesting.
Yeah.
But there's so much compelling research out there, and it's been out there for 20 years, some of it. But people just take a little piece and think, oh, I might change that bit of my coaching style, but the rest doesn't suit me. But actually, when you put it all together, just reframing the way you talk, speak, and act, not changing your coaching strategy, but just the way you speak, improves performance, improves well-being, reduces that margin between top performance and bottom performance, and that's what we're really trying to do. You don't want that variation in performance, and that's that optimism and the resilience we're trying to build into athletes. And I think you can do that with your approach, and then individualising it within that. But there's certainly some really good benefits, and I've been doing some research on that to show that as well. Yeah, just been good. It's kind of fun too.
Yeah. And so when you do either coaching or train people in coaching and use positive psychology, can you say which part of your jobs would you say?
I probably do it as my I run a consulting business, Positiv Sports Coaching, and I mainly do it there. So organisations come to me, and I look at restructuring the way they coach, training the coaches. I'm working with a number of schools and training all their coaches. We've done a pilot study which was at Positiv 2012, where we've shown that the interventions improve well-being by about 14% for happy students, which is it's really hard to increase happiness in happy students, as you'd know. So we're doing a longitudinal study now with 600 athletes and 50 coaches, and looking at that intervention both from a well-being of the athletes, well-being of the coaches, but also a team connectedness. We're going to try and look at that and see if the team works better together. We've also found huge leadership outcomes from the athletes, where they get a lot better sense of their responsibilities as a leader, but also dissipating the pressure on them. Yeah. And I've changed that. So I've created models for how the coaches should behave, how the athletes should behave, and then a model for the 4 pillars in restructuring organisations. So we're looking at globally. Ideally, you're looking at global change within an organisation, but we start with the coach. The coach is the key in the approach of the coach. But what I've found is if a coach coaches in a positive way and the team loses, and the coach then follows all the systems in place to build the resilience and optimism so that the performance won't drop for the next game, the president of the club might come down and scream at them and tell them they've got to yell at the players. And we've seen this happen, and so you're actually undermining the process, because then the coach feels pressure from, so that what we then realised we had to get the administration on board to realise that the process and the science behind it shows performance will improve, and then realised we had to get the players involved in this as well, because on-field behaviour I found was really undermining the whole positive and looking at strengths. So we've identified that some of the things I look at is that players don't criticise other players, it's not their job. That we look at reminder strategies when players make strategy errors, when a teammate makes strategy errors, that I get the players to remind it. Remember, our strategy is this, rather than criticising. And if someone makes a skill error, you just accept it's a skill error, and skill errors happen in sport and they're always going to, and you just give process praise. So great attack on the ball. Yeah. So we've changed the way players, we've changed body language, negative attitudes to umpires, negative attitudes to the opposition. All of those things are reducing team performance. And once you identify that, the players change their mindset. And we found with some soccer teams, soccer was quite resistant culturally to the whole thing. They quite liked the thought of abusing other teammates, and they really argued their case for a while, and we got them to change. And it was very interesting that they were more upright in their stance, and we've got some video of that, and they so they were breathing better, they huddled in closer. We got the coaches to only identify strengths, so initially to praise people, individuals, for good things. So we looked at dealing with the negative with an optimistic mindset, but as a group. So we'd say, remember our strategy is, and not identifying, say, Tim, you did a bad job, but we might identify, John, you did a great job, and then they all gather in because they want to have done a great job. And I really took that from the education, positive education, where you get little kids, and instead of saying, Johnny, don't throw the paper, and everyone throws paper, saying, Peter, great job, you're sitting up straight, and all the kids sit up straight. So I took that from that, and it's really, really obvious and very immediate. Yeah. And we've had some really good results with it, so it's been good. Yeah.
And the challenges that you would normally focus on in coaching, or the people that you coach, what would that be? Some of
the biggest challenge is the mindset. People feel like in sport that shouting at people and putting individuals down improves performance, and they'll argue that by saying, look at this coach in the past, they won, and I use video footage of past coaches just screaming at individuals. But when we look at the science that's out there on positive psychology, it shows that you may get a small increase in performance by scaring people, but what you don't get is that long-term performance, and you don't get that long-term creativity, and people feel shame, they feel resistant to the coach, and that's why coaches' messages, we call it getting stale. We always talk about sports coaches getting stale, but it's not sports coaches getting stale, it's that people are sick of being abused, so the message is sick of it. Well, if you look at people's strengths, the coach can coach forever. And so there's been a number of coaches who have, in the past, gone through and coached a long time, but they're using that sort of focusing on people's strengths. So it's a bit like players getting called in and they've had a really good game of whatever, basketball, and they've scored 50 points, and they'll get called in and they'll look at video footage of all their errors. There might be 4 errors. It's just not a great way to reinforce performance, but it's fundamental to our game. So change, it's a real mindset change. The actual coaching, I don't interfere with the technical aspects of coaching. It's all about the mindset. It's the way we phrase it, the way we look at it. So we're always looking to review the positives first. We remind her about what our strategies were, and we don't individualise that. We only individualise the positive, and then we always finish with remembering the positives. Or keep up, I would say. Then keep up with the good, whatever you're doing well, which you've already identified. So really focusing on building both things. So we're not avoiding the negative, but we're looking at it from an optimistic mindset, and we're looking at it in reminding, because people don't go out as a player to do the wrong thing. And skill errors will occur, and we just have to accept that. And everyone knows that, but under pressure, coaches will still point people out, because it is frustrating if someone drops the ball or misses an easy shot, but history says it won't change. No, people shoot 50% in basketball. They've been shooting it forever. In AFL, Australian Football League, from set shots to about 65%. It hasn't changed ever. Within variation. But baseball doesn't change much on their hits. So we're not getting changes in those areas. So you've got to accept skill will happen. And sport's about failure. I mean, we get dropped from teams, we get injured, we make a mistake. You're going to need resilience to survive in sport. And so you actually got to be able to cope with failure. And then the benefit of all this is, I call it well-being by stealth, that I sell the performance to the coaches and the teams and the clubs. I'm saying this will all improve your performance, but the beauty of it is it improves well-being. And we've got in Australia about 25% of, I think it's 16 to 24-year-olds have had reported a mental illness, predominantly depression, within 12 months. So in every sports team in Australia, and it would be reflected around the world, every sports team, 1/4 of your team has depression or something sometime each year. 1/4 of your team. If you can give them the tools to perform better and to handle those negative times and not get into that depressive state or to be able to get out of it, your team's going to perform better just by the fact that you've got 1/4 of your team feeling good about themselves. So I say to coaches, even though they didn't sign up for this, the coach is almost like the gatekeeper to the well-being of their athletes. And when coaches get that, because coaches do want to look after their players, when you can show them, and we can use I've actually done research to show it, that we can improve the well-being of these people, their athletes. It actually improves the well-being of the coaches as well, but the coaches really do like it. So you're actually getting a performance and a well-being aspect, which is positive psychology. Yeah. But you can measure it, and we'll be able to measure a lot of that when that's what we're doing at the moment. But the performance, even just really quickly, I've had school teams, kids really respond really quickly. They're less resistant to change, of course, but when I say kids, I mean 18-year-old. They've gone from losing by 100 points in a football game to losing by 1 point in one particular team. Now, they didn't win, but the beauty was twofold. One, they improved dramatically, but two, they only just lost, which is quite disappointing. And then they really handled that well, they really framed that well, and then they were able to win their next game against a not quite as good a team. So they improved their performance, but they could still handle that losing. It's not like some kind of fairy tale finish where they won. In fact, the soccer team I work with lost within the last 10 seconds with an own goal. And in the past, they would have, that person who scored the own goal would have just been caned by the rest of the community and Facebooked and all that. And instead they got all support straight away, and it was a really great change in mindset, and then they won the next game. And they had really good ability to have that team resilience and that optimism and accept that it's a contest, so you can't always win. Just fact, you're not always going to win, and you've got to be able to try to win as hard as you can, but be able to play again. It's a long season, keep your performance up. And so there's a lot of challenges there, but the coaches, once you get them over, they get it. And then they say, this is what I do. And they really own it. And it's just a matter of then that the other thing is to get them to do it consistently. Under pressure, people slip back. Under pressure, people, and that's why I created models. I've got like, I don't know if you can see, but a couple of models here. And the top one,
I can see the top one.
So the top one there is a what I call a positive sports coaching wheel that I've developed, and I get the coaches to laminate that and have that on their clipboard, and then they can follow it through. They can follow through the steps, which you probably can see there, but you can jump on the website or you can scan it. And then I actually get a model. Can you see the bottom one?
Yeah, I can see the bottom one.
The model one there, the positive athlete interaction diamond. I get the players to have that one, and they understand that the core of the diamond, the core of their activities, is to focus on encouraging their teammates. What we do with that too is it enables the players that are really good feel like all the pressure's on them. And one of the things we wanted to do was take that away. And so if your core job is to make your team better, that takes the pressure off you. And their job is to encourage people and build people rather than to feel frustrated if they're disrupting your performance. Your job is to make everyone else better. And we've really and it's just worked really well. Players just really took that responsibility. And it meant if someone missed an easy goal, instead of dropping their head and carrying on, their teammates ran to them and encouraged them, but also they physically kept their body language positive, which kept the team up. And so it stops those changing momentums, which you see really obviously in tennis. You can just see a player mentally get on top of another player. It doesn't matter what the score is. You can just see it happen and they get crushed. This is where we're really concentrating on those things. Now, one-on-one sports slightly different, but we just follow these models, and it's worked really well in tennis. But in team sports, we're really encouraging people to their core of their focus has got to be on encouraging others. And we're taking away their feeling that they should be going around and criticising teammates and shaking their head and doing the negative things and making people feel bad when they make a mistake, because you know you made a mistake in sport, and we know from the negativity bias that that's the thing you remember from the game anyway. So, which I've also looked to address. At the end of every game, the players write down their 5 best things and hand it to the coach. And we try and reframe even the way they think about their performance. So, win or lose, people remember that one moment where you missed that shot or dropped that ball, or what we're getting to do is to write down just 5 things they did well. And in doing that, they remember the 5. They start to, when someone asks them, how did you go in your game, they'll actually say those 5 things. And so then it builds, because then the person hears what they did well and they feel their self-esteem. But coaches have found it extraordinary because they get this data in. And those middle range players, you tend to notice the really good and the really weak, and you don't notice your middle players because they do what they do. This data for the coaches, they've realised they had players in the wrong positions on the field, that people had strengths they hadn't realised. So they've found it really valuable for those middle players that they hadn't been focusing on. So that's been good as well. So, and that's one of those fundamental sort of structural changes we then use, and then that's the way they would report about the performance of their team based on their feedback of what they did well, rather than looking at trying to fix errors all the time. We're trying to build the strengths. And I think as Psykologi said, that there's no limit to your strengths. You can keep going up, but to fix a deficit, you can only go to a certain point. So we're really focusing on that end of it, which is and it's been really going well. It's quite extraordinary how well it's going in sport. And so I'm looking at training, in talks with both Victorian and South Australian government about potentially training every coach and looking at this and really just changing the way so that when my children who are young go to sport, I don't want some angry parent screaming at them. And that's what you get worldwide. It's terrible. And so, but if people know that this will improve performance, they'll change those. So even if you don't know anything about the game, if you keep kids in sport, that's what we want. We lose kids because coaches are mean. And so people feel bad. And what we wanted to do is change that mindset. Now, not all coaches are, but in Australia we have a huge, I suppose, sporting culture, and people play sport all the way up to their very old age, and there's amateur sports going everywhere. So there's a huge requirement of amateur coaches, and so everyone's a coach. And so we need to just change that mindset and the way they look at it. And if they're looking at following a nice simple model that they can follow, I'm hoping that we can change just that attitude. So So that's how we're changing the coaches. So it's working really well. The coaches are initially very open to it, but they do like the performance aspect. And I know Martin Seligman's research is just so clear on you focus on the strengths and you'll improve performance. And we're not. I always say we're not happyology. We're not just looking at the positives. We deal with the negatives, but we're dealing with them in a team context, not individualising it, and we're looking at improving in an optimistic mindset, I say. And there's a fair bit of training that goes into that, but we can get changes really quickly, even from people doing a half-day workshop. More the elite coaches are going through maybe 2.5 days, and then some follow-up with all their athletes and big organisations. But we can change attitudes pretty quickly. People, they get it intuitively in sport that they should be focusing on the positives. Just easy not to. And frustrating. Sport's frustrating. You know, it's an emotional game. So we've got to take that side about it and make sure that it's strategy. We even change their note sheets they have on their scoreboard for their clipboard for the coaches, and I've made 2/3 of it all good things they have to know. And we only have a small section on strategy errors and a small section on positional changes. And so that they're just visually, they've got no space to fill bad things in. And so then they start to note. And I even do, part of my training, they look at video of their own team, 10 minutes. And I get them to note down everything they observe in that 10 minutes that they would talk to their players about. And they might note 10 things, so. And maybe 5 would then identify as positive and 5 negative. So usually an even split. Sometimes a little bit more positive because they know it's about positive. But then we look at the same video again, and I ask them to write down only the positives they see, and their list is 25, 30 things. So they're actually physically blinded to maybe 15 to 20 things they didn't even see. They were just blinded to it until they start looking for the positives. They're actually missing parts of the game. They're actually missing 15, 20 coaching opportunities that they just can't see because their brain's so wired to look for the negatives. And once you get them over the line on that, they just realise they open the spectrum of what they're looking at in the game. So that changes them as well because they realise that there's more, because that's all about performance. And then once you start identifying things, so it's really interesting how much narrower our vision becomes. And how quickly you can broaden it with a change in mindset. So the positive psychology has been great with that. It's going to revolutionise. I'm sure it's had a significant impact in sports coaching already around the world, but I reckon it's going to really revolutionise it over the next 10 years. I think there's just going to be certainly in Australia, there's going to be a complete mind shift in the way we coach, in the way coaches approach it from all levels, because just even from retention of kids in sport, which is a huge factor, with obesity and health and wellbeing. So there's a lot of money to fund these sorts of things. Keeping kids in sport, coaches are principal to it. It's not kids. All in Australia, kids do sport. They leave sport because of a bad experience. And I think that I can't remember the data off the top of my head, but it's something like 80% is coach related. Coach or parent related. So if you make that experience better and performance is better, I think we'll keep them in it. So it's kind of exciting there. So many of the coaches that I interview, they work with individuals, so I sometimes ask them, so what happens before you meet them, what happens in the first session, what happens in between, but I don't think it fits for a team concept. I work with some individual coaches, so but even with the team, I suppose beforehand, depending how they found out about me, they're usually receptive to the concept because usually they're coming to me. Or they've heard me at a seminar or something like that. So they're usually interested in doing it. And then it's just a matter of talking about, are you interested in really changing your style and your focus, and can we get the whole organisation on board? And that seems to work. So generally speaking, they've seen something about it beforehand, so they've got a sense they want to do this. And then it's a matter of that individual then taking it to the organisation. Then we tend to pick up more coaches because cost efficiencies, if they can get their 8 coaches trained for the same as 1 coach. Sometimes I'm working with individual coaches. It works really well in groups of coaches, though, 8 or 9, because then they get to bounce ideas and questions, because everyone's individual and every coach coaches in a different way, and I'm not telling them how to coach, I'm just framing their thinking whilst they coach. And so people say, what happens in this scenario? What happens when this happens? What happens? And we talk through them. And then there'll be situations where everyone will act differently, and we can work out a way of still maintaining this positive approach. What happens if a player just won't do what they've told, what would be our strategies there? You know, what have you got to play? Who won't follow the game plan? What do you do there? But once you work through it, there's always a solution and always fits within the positive mindset, and they're usually pretty happy. And often they didn't have a solution beforehand. So a lot of these things they're bringing up, they actually didn't have a solution anyway. So because we're creating structures and systems, it enables them to follow something. And like the positive sports coaching wheel, I know a lot of the coaches that do it then go and do it at home to their wives, and they go to work and they do it to their colleagues, and they report back to me that they're actually just using the same technique all the time to everyone, and it's working really well. So, and a lot of them, especially very negative coaches, have just they're the real, the born agains. They really change their mindset. They're just going, wow, you just opened my eyes to my whole life. So that's kind of fun. The good coaches are really, really positive. It improves and it really fits, and they just go, I get it.
Yeah.
The other coaches that you're really just changing everything from the way they think about their players, the way the tone of their voice, their attitude as they come to training, their attitude when they go to work, home, that completely changes. And so people are reporting back to me that it's just actually been life-changing for them as a coach, which does seem to be a sort of a pattern with positive psychology, generally speaking. When you hear education or business, when people are doing it, it does seem to, a number of people saying, wow, you've actually reframed the way I'm thinking about everything. And I suppose that's the negativity bias, especially, where people realise I'm always looking at things without meaning to, because you can't help it, in a negative fashion. And by sort of forcing the positive a bit more, you open up to that spectrum of things you see, like I do with the sports coaches. In life, they start to notice nice flowers in the garden rather than the lawn isn't mowed, and so things like that. Yeah, so I think it's been, and then they take it really on. So it's been some really good feedback. But I've only been doing it for 2 years now, so we're just building momentum right now.
Right.
But if we can get work with a couple of these governments and really build it from a I suppose institutional level all the way through at the grassroots and build it up, which is what we're looking at doing, then it's just going to be one of those things that just becomes the fundamentals of coaching. Yeah. At the moment, it's kind of an elite sport and elite school program. So people who really want to develop their club, and they've got money and resources and time to sort of really train their people. But I want it to be open for everyone to be just doing every, and obviously the elite organisations want that greater levels of training and they always want the edge. But from a basic process point of view, it isn't that hard. To do it really, really well in a pressure environment takes more training. Yeah. But if you're a coach of an under-8 netball team, with one of my friends, his wife coached an under-8 netball team, and she did it with her team, and they went from bottom to second in the ladder. But what she liked was the little under-8 girls said, our coach doesn't yell at us to the opposition. Yeah. And she was just going, wow, people are yelling at under-8 girls. That means they're 7-year-old girls. It's pretty young. Yeah. And it's just and they thought it was odd that their coach wasn't yelling at them. Yeah. And they improved. Yeah. And they improved through it. So it's and that was without much training. So seems to work pretty quickly. Yeah. Which is good.
Is there a process to it? You say you're changing their mindset, the way that they're thinking. Are they following a certain process or principles or? Yeah,
look, initially, yes, I run them through a way of identifying their current thinking, and I look at current coaches and the way I use video footage of current coaches who are being less than positive, I suppose. Yeah. And then we look at that and we talk about whether that's helping the game or whatever, and I get them to decide whether they would like to, if they had a red ball and a green ball, which one would they choose? And the green ball improves their team's strengths, and the red ball reduces their team's weaknesses. So less mistakes with the red ball, and they have to choose. And they tend to be split down the line on who wants to choose the red ball and the green ball, and we talk about that. And then over the process we go through, by the end they would all be going for that green ball approach of focusing on building strengths, not fixing the weaknesses. Now, they're both valid methods and we're looking at them both, but we're trying to sort of build that focus on the strengths. So there is a process that we go through, and we look at resilience and we look at optimism, we look at all the science behind it. It's very science-based, it's evidence-based, so I use the science that's available. And as I'm building my research as well, we integrate it in, but the science is there. So I go through the science and I explain it, and it's just so compelling on every level. So we go through the science, we talk about, but I put it all in a context that sports people can get, that's interesting, that's fun. so that they build that interest. I think you'll talk about how you create that rapport, and the people know that I know sport as well, and I've got a lot of background in there, so they get a sense of this works and the science is legitimate, and they haven't got counter science. It's not like they've got another lot of science saying this doesn't work. The science is compelling.
Yeah.
It's just that I suppose in sports we don't always research that much anyway, and also the science has sat and also almost been used, even at sports research, in business, in education. You know, they've done the research but almost use it elsewhere rather than grabbing it all. And I think you've identified there wasn't anything that just said to me, and this is how you use all this research. So I had to create it myself, which is sort of fell into it because I had to do it. I wanted to train a group of people in it. I just didn't have a thing they could do, because coaches like to follow a process. They need a simple diagram, and when I've developed these, and I've actually used the same models with corporates now and a few leadership, and I worked with a sales team conference and improved their sales performance based on all with sport. I didn't change what I did, but when we used the same models, we used all the sports language, but we just talked about sales, how that could then link to theirs, and it worked just the same. So it's really interesting. I think you just need models to follow and a sense of what to do, and then we do a lot of practice runs, and we have mock coaching scenarios that we then work through the steps in my Positiv sports coaching wheel. So we work through that, and then we go and do real life games, depending on how long I'm with them, and we review that. I usually do some kind of training, and then 2 weeks later I come back, and so they've had a few games and they've actually had run training sessions, and often they video them and we can analyse that and just go back. But most of that, it doesn't seem to be needs to be retrained after 2 weeks. It's more just tweaking it and just adjusting their approach. They've actually got it. They get it after a couple of days training, and the players very strongly pick it up. The players are very strong. In fact, if you interview them, which we've done some interviews one-on-one, they are often quite anti the coach, but in a group they'll never say it, and really unhappy about this, and they love the change. Yeah, they love the change, but you wouldn't have picked it. It wouldn't be you wouldn't pick it in the group environment. So yeah, the players really respond well. And they enjoy. The middle players felt like they had more recognition. The elite players felt like they had less pressure, and the bottom players felt like they were enjoying their game more and being not signalled out as the worst. Because you kind of know where you sit in your sports hierarchy. You sort of know, so you don't need people pointing it out. But if you do, but you need everyone to win. You need everyone to perform at their best, not at the best, because that can't happen. And so that seemed to be working well. But yeah, everyone seemed to feel better about that as well. But a lot less, the players were able to handle the pressure better, and I thought the coaches were too. I thought coaches were putting some of their pressure onto their players, and it was interesting that once you just gave them a process to follow, they just had confidence in the process, and they knew what they were going to say, and they were planning out what they were going to say. So I get them to really identify if you wanted your team to centre the ball all the time, and maybe they're not doing that, but one player does. When you bring them in, you identify the player that did, and they're saying, great work for centering the ball. That's what I want everyone to do. Not saying, you're never centering the ball. Actually telling everyone, this is what, and then everyone listens, because we know that people listen when you praise people. When you criticise, every player just shuts off and walks away. And we've actually got video of them just all sort of not listening when they're yelling at people. So it's really interesting. So, and because they know what they're going to say, because they've had to pre-plan it, it's a little bit more structured for them, rather than just thinking they have to have some great history-making, screaming speech, which is sort of what sport, if you watch the movies and things. But yeah, so it's interesting. It's just a subtle change. They can still yell. They can still be saying, remember what we're going to do. Remember this. What did we talk about before the game? Remember. They can really be yelling. But it's got to be not at individuals, and it's got to be trying to motivate, not just because you're angry. Trying to motivate a team, so you can motivate a team. I'm not saying it's all this sweet. So it's not that much different. It's just a frame of reference change that we're looking at.
And when you say model and step, does this one have steps they follow, or is it?
So I don't know if you can see, but will I put it up?
I can see the top one.
See. So we basically go through the coaching wheel, and so the first thing we do is identify what they're doing well. So if you're in a sports scenario, that might be great job, really like your intensity at the ball, you're really attacking the ball really well. We then go through and we identify individuals. John, you did a great job centering the ball. That's exactly what we're looking for. Terrific job, work, John. Then we say, remember what our strategies were, and these will be things that we're not doing well. Remember, we're meant to keep number 5 away from the ball. Remember, we're meant to always be centering into the goal square. Remember, we're meant to stay on our man. We remind them of those things, and then we then go through the next step of actually telling them the strategy. So actually saying, this is what I want you to do. So they're all positive. This is what I want you to do then. This is what you've got to do. And now keep up that intensity, keep up that attack on the ball you had at the start. And that's what they do. And they do it every time they speak to a player.
Yeah.
And they get really quick. It takes about somewhere between 2 and 7 seconds when they get good at it. Yeah. And so they actually can just call a player aside and just go through that process. Yeah. We're calling it wheeling them. And then or it could be a long process if it's a half time. Yeah. But every time they talk to a player, they've got to go through that full process. The biggest thing they try and do is avoid the full circle. They try and just go halfway. The coaches, they will say, oh, it'll be good enough if we go halfway, but after some convincing, we get them to go all the way through. Because
through the process.
So they've got to come back through and say, this is what I want you to do, and then keep up the work you've done, and that works. That closes that circle and the process. So initially they want to shorten it because it's a bit harder, but once they get used to it, they do it all the time, and they can do it really quickly, and they almost don't realise they're doing it. But initially it's just practice. Yeah. I get them to watch sport at home. Gee, what tough homework, and just do it all the time. Just give speeches to each player out loud when they're at home. Yeah. So their wives or husbands think they're a bit crazy, but it's really good. It's just practice. It's just practice doing it. The players, they don't have to really practice. They just have to realise their focus is on improving performance, and that if they see an error, they process praise. So a skill error, they process praise. If it's a strategy error, then they remind them. Remember, we're centering the ball, and that's all they have to do. So we're not trying to overburden the players because their job is to play. Yeah. But we're trying to dissipate the pressure and also keep that positive attitude within the game. I mean, so that they can keep fighting out a game. We know optimistic, players keep performance under pressure, and pessimistic players drop performance under pressure, and all science is showing that. So we're trying to keep these players as optimistic, and we're trying to do that without any massive psychological intervention. We're assuming that most people are borderline, optimistic, pessimistic, so there's obviously extreme cases, but trying to keep that optimistic mindset within the team, and then that builds that resilience, that builds that performance. It enables them, if you lose one week, you can come back the next week. It doesn't spiral down to a series of defeats, and so that's been quite. So the coaches have got a full process they must follow, and we try and train them in each of those steps, and we have a number of. We start with theory, and we build into practicing with themselves and then with their team, and then they have to practice at home, and they get better. They get really surprisingly how quick they get at it. Within 2 weeks they're just doing it. Yeah. And they say they're doing it automatically to other people. It's really interesting. Well, but the players pick it up straight away. They're the main one is just body language, behaviour. We've got to change. We want to make sure that people aren't dropping their heads when they do something wrong. You just got to accept, made a mistake, keep going. Yeah. Because every time you drop your head, you're dropping performance. We want to keep that performance up. Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you're the worst player in the team. We just got to get you at your maximum performance all the time. And the coach can then manipulate that, but that seems to work really well. Yeah. So I suppose the biggest challenge then is the whole organisation. Yeah. And what we've found is they're more resistant to change. Yeah. They like the thought of a coach screaming at people if they lose at all levels. They think that's their job as a board or a president. I've changed the way they frame wins and loses. We're unemotional about scores. So. We lost the game by 20 points. We won the game by 20 points. It's just a line. We don't use emotive words in there. We're emotional about performance. So John Smith did some fantastic running tackle, and it was amazing to see. We're emotional about that, not about the score. And that takes the sting out of wins and losses from an organisational point of view, so you don't drag your organisation down. So we've been unemotional with the scores. We're doing a few other things with the board about enabling the coach to be positive, and just educating them on actually what the coach is trying to do and the players are trying to do, and showing them the science. It's all science-based. Show the science is definitive. They can argue against the science, but you show them more science, and we show more science, and they really just start to go, okay, this will improve performance. And then I say, and it'll improve well-being. So we're selling the performance, and it improves well-being. And the well-being argument is compelling. It's really what we're about in positive psychology, and the players really get the well-being aspect. There's no doubt about it. if you're talking 1/4 of your team has got some kind of problem, and if you give them this, I call it a mental toolkit to handle those negative times, then they're able to get through them and keep their performance up on a field, but also in life. And we know, if you have a depressive episode as a younger person, you're more likely to have it again and again, unless there's intervention. And so we're trying to give them those tools. As I said before, I just find the coaches unwittingly are that sort of that gatekeeper to their mental well-being, and they've just got to accept that. And then their job is to win, but they can achieve the other within that sort of package. Yeah. So that's what's really good. That's why it sells, I suppose, in the sense of the coaches grab it and say, yeah, this is pretty good. Yeah. There's still many coaches out here who haven't been trained who know about it and will just go, oh, it's all just positive rubbish. But I think that's probably what positive psychology sometimes suffers from, people who say they practice positive psychology but actually haven't read the research. Yeah. And they don't, they're only looking at being happy, and it's just not what we're doing. We're really dealing with those negative emotions, but just in a different mindset. And I think when they go through the training, even the most cynical go, it's pretty compelling. I know. Yeah. But making sure they change everything. When they're in the gym, off season, you still got to be doing this. Yeah. You can't then be thinking that it'll be good motivation to scream at people because they're not doing enough push-ups in pre-season. It just doesn't work. And we've also found this works really well because it's sort of individualised in a sense. Different groups of people cope well with the same process. Well, if you're doing that screening method, some people cope with that and do really well, but a number don't. Yeah. Certainly I would think the Indigenous population who participate don't appreciate that sort of verbal abuse at all, and don't perform as well as looking at strengths and looking at the focusing on it, and that's certainly evident in some of the sessions I've done, but that's only anecdotal, that's not research at this point in time, but it will be, interesting.
Do you use assessments?
Well, I do research, so I do research, so I link up with the University of Melbourne, and they do psychological proper analysis of the well-being. We're doing some qualitative interviews for coaches, and we're just getting a new test to look at team connectiveness. So we're just looking at some number of. So we do different measures.
But would you do it to train people, or would you let the coaches do assessments, or is it only for research purposes?
We do. In some clubs or schools, they want to know, is the well-being being improved? Yeah. We can look at performance data on the teams. We can actually look at that. So we do look at that and report that back. Yeah, if they've requested that, or it's confidential research that we're just looking at adding to that pool of information to prove it works. Yeah. If we can prove it works, the science is the sell. It's harder to measure performance. You can do it, of course, but you've got to look at. I think Martin's sort of used betting spreads of the basketball teams and then able to analyse, because you've got to be able to look at the stock that you've got in the team and how it's hard to measure performance with trades in the off season. Yeah. So, but we can look at anecdotally, we're already seeing improved performance, and individuals' performance, and just a more sort of an optimistic performance, so they're maintaining their levels. But that is a harder one to measure because of changes in personnel per season. But we do look at the well-being aspect, and we are looking at. We think team connectiveness might be a really good measure that you can then show the team's really well bonded, and that's something that I think is used in corporations. So we're actually sort of grabbing some research there. You know more than me probably. We're just looking at grabbing that now to look at that in our big study. So, by looking at we've got 50 coaches and 600 athletes, and we're doing control groups over that 2-year period. So one group. It's going to be really good research. I think we'll get some really good measures. We're just looking at how much we can measure. Yeah. Because you always want more data. Yeah. And the teams will use that to justify their process, I suppose. But really, from my point of view, it's about then saying, "Hey, government, look what we're doing for well-being. Yeah. This has got to be everywhere. This has got to be everything we do."
And if the team or the coach, if they want to know if their well-being has improved, which assessment would you use for that?
We're using the. You've got me on the hop there, and I can't think of it. I'll have to. I can't think what it's called. Yeah, we're using 2 different tests there, but I'll.
Okay, you can. Send it to me afterwards. Yeah.
But the basic, the standard ones you use, well validated ones. We're not trying to be. We wanted to stay right within that well validated methods of assessment, so that it would resonate well within the academic world. Yeah, because that's what you want. You don't. We haven't developed our own tests at this stage because we thought we'd have to then validate.
Yeah.
And then there's some pretty simple ones that I just can't think what they're called right now.
Right. And what about interventions? Do you use specific interventions, or have you come up with your own? Or
probably we individualise. If you're talking about a particular case within, all training's tailored to that group. You know, if it's a professional team, its environment, the basic playing cohort, the coaches' attitudes, the number of coaches, what they're looking for. And if there's specific people who aren't performing or they're not towing the line, I suppose, in that cultural change, then usually I'm either working with them one-on-one or I'm advising the coach on how to work with them one-on-one. And we've found that usually that person has either a problem with the coach that pre-existed or a problem with another player that pre-existed.
Right.
So usually it's nothing to do with that. Right. It's more about almost like that, you know, you're a kid and you carry on to get attention. So once we identify that, often we can smooth that over and you identify that people didn't realise. And it doesn't seem to be the elite end or the bottom end. It'll be a middle player who's almost crying out for some recognition. And we usually can solve that without anything too complex.
Yeah.
But, you know, obviously if it's something where we need psychological intervention, that would be something that would move into the support mechanisms for either the sports club or the school.
Yeah.
And they would move away from it, yeah. So.
Right. What about your knowledge about the research? You say you teach them, you tell them about it? How does that happen? Yeah,
so the research, well, first I looked at all the education research, so I had a look at that and worked with people in education. That's where I sort of heard about it. And so then I've just gone and researched the positive psych literature on sports and sports coaching and just captured that. And then what I do is I pick the most compelling and interesting bits of research that would sell the message I want to sell, and I go through that with them and I really just show them the methodology very simply and ask them what they think the result would be, and then show them the results. And you know, it's twice as strong if you're looking at strengths rather than weaknesses. So some really obvious stuff. I really like the research where they looked at the way players and managers just talked in the paper, so where they cut out those 15,000 articles out of newspapers in the United States, and then they measured which teams were pessimistic and optimistic just based on the way they talked about themselves, and then showed performance linked to that, because that one really helps me with the administration side. Yeah. Everything you say and do is going to affect team performance, and I can show that, so I like that sort of thing. So I pick ones that will get the message that I need to sell through, because I can't go through this isn't an audience that wants a whole lot of research. They're not going to read a whole paper. So I give snapshots, summary, make it interesting, tell a bit of a story about it, focus on all the league that it was involved with in the sports, and then really just show them the results. So really simplifying it. So we're not looking at the science in detail. We're not looking at anything. We're just really what was researched and the outcome, and then making them guess beforehand what that is. So then they tend to be surprised, or it makes them think about it. I want them to actually think about that moment, so that it needs to be simple enough that they could then talk to their friend and they can go home and tell someone, do you know, I do this because that helps them justify what they're doing. Yeah. I'm giving them a little, I suppose, a research toolkit, a very simple one, that they can then use to tell other people, this is why I do it this way, because that helps the message get out there. Because, you know, one of my, I suppose, things I want to do is to spread that approach in coaching everywhere, and you do that by getting the converted to tell others. But you've got to give them, you know, predominantly we're talking about people who wouldn't read research as a general day-to-day. Not many people do, I suppose. Sadly, for PhD. So that when you do get it, you've got to really simplify it and make it, because it is interesting. But you need to almost package it up like a newspaper. And go through. We do a lot of that. We actually go and do that though. I actually then simulate a lot of the research. So we go and look at newspaper articles. I cut out a whole lot from the month before about their particular sport, and we go and identify which are positive, optimistic, pessimistic. So we get them to go through, and we look at media conferences of the sport that they're in. I might just get a snapshot of 12, and I actually don't vet them. I just pick a whole lot, and then we analyse pessimistic, optimistic? When are they identifying individual players? When are they doing the wrong thing? So sort of putting a mirror in front of the coach without saying, you do the wrong thing here. Obviously that wouldn't be very positive psychology, I suppose, but actually letting them see, or that's not working, or that's not positive, that's not the approach, and actually seeing all that, and that one's good, that works really well, that coach really... So we're sort of getting them to identify it. So we do a lot of looking at the visual, we do a lot of looking at games where teams show real optimistic mind, when something goes wrong, and then ones where they don't, and then looking at their team performance for the rest of the season based on individual games. So it depends on who I'm working with, but I like to use a lot of video footage. The coaches really enjoy that because they're used to looking at video footage. And a lot of it where talk about the research, but then get them to identify that it actually does happen. Yeah. Because a lot of people say, I'm very positive, I'm a positive coach, I already do this. That's a lot of, probably 50%. And in some ways they're harder to teach because they already think they do it, but it's that change, that consistent doing it all the time, and once they can see other people doing it who are great coaches, just slipping, like, oh, I do that, oh, I could change that, we can talk about how they change it. So I like to use practical examples so that, it varies from group to group, but we really do try and engage. I really try and engage them and get them thinking about it so that they do change their mindset on a long-term basis. Yeah. You don't want to just give them some research and they're really excited, but then they don't change. It's about changing their behaviours and giving them the tools to do that so they can then help their players. Yeah. But if we get the players on board as well, the players do strengthen that, and if you get the whole club on board, the supporters are that sort of fourth pillar that's the hardest to capture. And really I've been going for them either with a session with supporters who want to come along, or parents in schools or in junior clubs, and talking to them about the science and again selling it. They love it. If you can capture them that way. If you can't capture them that way, we're using newsletters, the language we use, reporting on how we're changing the team in the newsletter. So and the way team reports come about, they might even add and talk about how the coaches have been retrained and sort of sell it. So we've got to get the supporters and the parents on side so they're not then complaining about the coach. A lot of pressure at every level, even the volunteer level. There's so much pressure on that coach. Everyone blames the coach, and we've got to dissipate that pressure so everyone supports it. So it's that's been the hardest pillar to sort of work through. Yeah. Only because you can't capture them as easily. It's, in a school environment, I can get the parents all together and I can talk to them, and you've got them. You can do 1 hour and you've got them. But in a club environment, it's hard to capture them. But we're looking at maybe using video footage on the internet, and the way we talk about it in reports and things like that. And again, it's a very varied group. It'd be, the ideal is for a supporter group to be just cheering your team, not booing the other team, encouraging the team when they're going down, and then it'll improve performance for the season. And that's harder to capture, of course, because it's an emotional game. But that would be great. And maybe if you can control the bits that are controllable, like cheer squads and that we have here in Australia for the sport. So there's some control over those groups in the bigger sports, but certainly in a school environment, the parents are really important because they're the ones who can then say the right thing when their child finishes their game. Like, not ask, did you win or lose first? Ask, what did you do well first? Yeah. And so you can reprioritise the importance of the actual game. Yeah, so we do a few things like that as well, which is good. Yeah. And do you change when you teach people? Do you change depending on what sports they're in? Like, do you adapt to can you say something about the adapting? Yeah. Look, I use research across all sports, in all of it, because I want to give them a breadth of open their eyes to other sports, because sometimes we're a little bit narrow focused, and a lot of it's American, European research and stuff as well. So, but then I will tailor all the activities to that sport. So I would use the newspaper articles from their sport, video footage from their sport. All the imagery I'd use would be their sport, the photos, the quotes from athletes. So I tend to try and tailor it to their sport to a certain degree, because that resonates with them more. And then they look at footage of their own sport, their own team. Yeah. So I get them to provide 10 minutes of footage. Yeah. I might put it on them, so it doesn't matter whether you're an under-8 team or professional netball team, I don't mind, but you show your own footage, because I find it's much better when you look at your own footage and then realise you're actually blind to your own team. Because if you used a different sport, people would say, I'm not an expert in it, I don't know those players, there's a lot of excuses. Yeah. When it's your team you coach and you miss 15 positives in a 10-minute clip, which if you extrapolate out, what's that? I don't know, 500 positives in a game,
Yeah.
then you start to go, hang on, there's something I need to change here just from that.
Yeah.
And that gets them. So we do try and use their footage, so I put a lot on them, yeah, which is good, it works well.
What do you do to create positive expectations? Like usually expectations that a person has can influence the outcomes, both the coach's expectations but also the players' expectations?
Look, it's a tricky one because I don't always get them. There'll be one person who will have brought me over, but then you're dealing with an organisation and many have negative expectations. Many are just annoyed that they have to waste their time being trained. The players often don't want to come to another meeting. Then they hear a lot of things. There's a lot of information. So really I rely on some good opening activities that start to make them think and get them engaged, because I want them to be engaged. And then I run a relatively entertaining program, a lot of videos, a lot of short, sharp 10-second clips and things like that as part of it. So we're trying to keep them engaged, but really focusing on science. It's evidence-based. We're not... so keeping it interesting, but having the evidence there. The evidence is what gets them.
Yeah.
But you've got to make them listen to actually hear the evidence. So,
yeah.
So there's some. I use a lot of elite athlete quotes and things that they're interested in, especially for the players, and to get them interested and listen. But also it's short, it's sharp. There's not great long dissertations like you're getting off from because they're not going to. They'll lose it. So the science is short and sharp and compelling. And then get them to discuss. It's a lot of discussion, a lot of them talking back. But yeah, as far as building the expectation, I often don't get that opportunity. So which would be great.
Yeah.
The ideal scenario is when you get people who have come to a seminar or something you've given and they've heard about it and they're excited and they want you back at their club and they've all been there and then they're really excited because they're.
Yeah.
But in some ways, the surprises worn off, and maybe the surprise of the stats helps build people's interest. Also, just credibility. I've been in the sports industry a long time, working in a lot of different organisations, and so people feel like there's some credibility there. It's not someone from outside sport, which is often the case, coming in and telling them this sort of stuff. They will switch off pretty quickly within that sort of environment. So I've dealt with coaches and athletes for a long time, and so I know a number of them. But also they get the sense that sport, you understand what they're going through. Yeah. It's not some kind of theoretical. This isn't a theoretical program. This is a practical application of positive psychology, which is what positive psychology is meant to do. So yeah.
What about relationships? Because in coaching, or at least psychotherapy, there's research to suggest that the relationship that the coach or the therapist has with the person they're trying to help can predict a lot of the outcome. So what do you do to help the coach's relationships with the players?
Usually that's not their area of weakness, to be honest. Usually they've got a relatively good relationship. Where they don't, this actually just changed their mindsets and improved it, because usually the relationship degrades over time because you're using this, you're not doing good enough, and it just slowly degrades. And so if there's something changing and talking about positives, that improves that relationship. So there's a couple of coaches where that's just dramatically improved. The playing group and everyone was significantly disjointed, and even their physical stance was spread out so far from the coach that you had to shout to talk to them. They were so far away and they were so far from each other, and by the end they were all really in close and he could talk really quietly. And it was just interesting, and none of them realised that. We just happened to be videoing it, so we could see some progression. But they and we weren't looking for that either. It just was a phenomenon we noticed. So in that sense that helps them, but And by looking at people's strengths and those sorts of things, I suppose we're building their relationship. But most coaches are pretty good with the relationship. Yeah. Even the really angry coaches that scream at people, the players really look up to their coach.
Right.
It's someone you remember forever. There's very that teacher-student relationship. So mostly they already have good relationships. So it's not something, that's not what I'm coming in to fix at that point. That doesn't seem to be the problem. Right. It's about, there's no problem. Usually there's no problem. I'm just saying here's a better way to slightly adjust what you're doing. Usually there's not a problem in that sense. So that's not where I'm coming in. It's not an intervention in that area. Yeah.
What about the players' engagement in like doing this sort of stuff? if the coach is not there, like in between games or training sessions, or if the coach is far away on side and you're over here, like do you help the coach help the players?
Look, I work with the players by themselves without the coach in the room.
Yeah.
So I always talk to them individually so they can vent if they need to and argue their case without a coach in the room. So I usually work with the players individually. And then their role, I'm reducing their role. There's been a real tendency, certainly in Australia, I suspect around the world, of coaches giving the players leadership and responsibility. But it's getting to the point where coaches are almost asking the players what we should do next.
Right.
Players don't want that. Players want to be coached. Players, you're an 18-year-old kid. You just want to do what you're told and know your place. And so I'm taking a bit of that away, and I'm saying to the players, your only job is to help your teammates play better, so encourage them. So I've simplified their role. So I think that means that they don't have to do anything. I'm not actually asking them to do anything. I'm actually asking them to just not scream at each other. Yeah. It's the only thing I'm not asking them to do. Other than that, I'm asking them to encourage teammates and follow this simple diamond, but really I'm reducing their responsibilities rather than extending it. So if the coach isn't there, well, they don't have to do anything.
Right.
In the game,
the
only thing that we would be, initially we look out for is bad body language, people speaking to other players, but what we've been doing is the reverse, is identifying people who really do a great job encouraging people that made a mistake but kept good body language, people that ran over to someone who made a mistake. So we're looking at all the positives and getting the players to follow it that way. So we're trying to follow our own theory in that, and that's worked really well. So the players get that, but they don't have any responsibility. I'm a bit anti the whole give these players all this responsibility. Their job is to play whatever sport they play at their highest level, and that gap between best performance and worst has got to be the lowest possible. That's all they should be doing.
Yeah.
Coach is coach. I just think they're a separate job. I think there's been a real blurring of the boundaries over the years, and maybe that's putting too much responsibility on them. But other people would argue the opposite.
Yeah. You mentioned something about the clipboard.
Yeah, look, what I do with the coaches too is we get this laminated, and they have it on their clipboard the whole time, so that, especially early on, but just as a reminder once they're really good at it. So we find that's really useful for them, and then also I have it on my website so that players can download it, they can show their family, they can shrink one up for a business card and laminate it up if they want to have something just to remind themselves. So it works really well as a reminder tool as well, just to remember to follow it. But also, sometimes the coaches forget. Under pressure, it's nice to have something to look at and follow, because it's really that pressure time of the game that's really important for us to follow those processes. It's really easier to be really nice and happy in the pre-season and while you're winning, but under pressure, can you follow these processes? And that requires structure and training, and just repetitive training, like anything else in sport. But having that on their clipboard has been really worked well for us as well, certainly early on. Sometimes it ends up under paper as they get used to it, but even then I sometimes see them have a little bit of a peek before they brief the players at a quarter time or something like that.
Yeah. And what do the players tell you, or the coaches tell you, has been most effective for them or worked best for them?
The players, interestingly, the bit I got from some of the players is it's really built their leadership capacity. So they've started to get a sense that leadership is more than just them yelling at people and saying do things, but actually their actions are really important, their body language is very important, their responsibility to other players, to when people make a mistake, their responsibility to process praise them and encourage them and keep their performance up. And so it wasn't something I was aiming for, but the feedback we're getting is that they really, a lot of the people are just talking really eloquently about how it's just transformed their leadership, whether they're the captain of the club or just another player. So that's been really valuable from a sort of a thing that they've got out of it. The players, I suppose, also just a frame of reference that they are doing good things in games and remembering good things. It's kind of sad that you play sport and you do 20 good things in a day and you remember the bad thing, and then you go to bed thinking, oh, I missed that shot, or I lost that point, and you've done 20 great things, and you should just be going to bed thinking, how great was it to do this, to make that basketball shot on the buzzer, and it didn't win the game, but it was still really cool to do, or just make that quick steal, or some of just really good moments. So I think getting them to start to remember them has been really valuable.
Yeah.
And also, they've also reported the players that they report to other people about their game differently. So when people say, how did you go? They talk about how their friends did a really good mark, or kicked a really good goal, or those sorts of things before they even mention the score. Or if they mention the score, they say, oh, we lost by 20 points, and then talk about those things. So rather than just feeling bad if they've lost and dropping their head, or even when they feel good, just saying, yeah, we won. Actually being a bit more articulate about it, and so sort of working out that range of emotions that you go through in sport. So it's probably really good for them in other aspects. We haven't studied that, but it'd be a great study as well.
Yeah.
So they weren't things necessarily we were aiming for, but we found that we're actually getting feedback that with the sort of the student athletes, so 18 and below, better attitude at home and at school, and to their work and to challenges and those sorts of things. That's what the players report, and they feel, whether it's really happening, but they feel like they're getting it a bit more, and when things are going well. So they're really good things. They're not actually what we're aiming for, but they're really good peripheral benefits, and that's from the coaches. The coaches feel like they're more connected to the team. They enjoy their work more. They feel like they're doing what they want to do, which is coach. They're bringing back their passion rather than spending a lot of the time being stressed, worried, not really enjoying the job and feeling the pressure. They're actually just enjoying the job and feeling like they're growing the young men or women in their charge, and they feel pretty good that they know that the way they're coaching is improving their well-being. So they feel really good about that. They feel responsible for that, but good about it, rather than just the negative aspects. So just the reframing the way they're thinking. But I think also they really feel good about the fact that they know, and the science is showing it, and our research is showing it, they're improving the well-being of the people they're looking after. Yeah. So they always sort of thought it, but now they know it. So it doesn't matter if these people don't go on to be professional players, or they know that when these people go on in life, this moment in sport is going to be something that enhances these people's life in every aspect for the rest of their lives. So that's really good for them. So that's what they're getting out of it, more than anything to do with performance or anything like that. Yeah. I think they find sometimes it's hard to get into this mode early, but then they really enjoy it. But they still have to work on it all the time. They can't. They find that it takes about a year to just be completely intuitive. But they really enjoy that sort of sense of that custodian of these players, and that they are making a difference, and they know they are. Yeah. It's not just about whether they win or lose. I think sometimes they feel like if their team loses all season, they've let the team down, and then the team then is going to be worse off. Yeah. But now they're identifying that win or lose, it's the way they do this that actually improves the team's well-being, and future outcomes in a whole lot of areas. If we then go back to Positiv 2012, read some of the abstracts, the interesting, flow-on effects of feeling happy or feeling good, of having that mental toolkit to handle with life's ups and downs that they're providing them, is going to be something that lasts with these people forever, especially if you're talking about young pre-14 kids. Yeah. Wow, making a really big effect. So I think they feel really good about that. Yeah. Which is sort of what they want, why they coach. Sometimes you forget that as you get into it. And these aren't always professional coaches. They still feel the same pressure. Doesn't matter if it's a school teacher coaching a team, they feel a lot of pressure. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think causes the benefits that you're seeing, the outcomes? Like, what could be some of the factors that are really important, or the mechanisms?
Well, firstly, understanding the research. Firstly, understanding that there is you can affect well-being, that you can change as a coach. So actually information, just that information, getting it out there, which is something we want to do with positive psychology, but really hard to get filtered down to the grassroots level. So the fact that they actually understands information from a coach point of view, firstly opens their eyes to this, and second, just what's the other key factors? Look, I suppose just the reframing of their thinking. A lot of the coaches just say, look, you've just reframed my thinking, you've really crystallised how I should be thinking, and it's just such a subtle shift. I'm not giving them tactical advice. I'm not telling them how to train the people from a physiological point of view. We're not looking at training programs. Everything else can remain the same. It's just a frame of reference and a way of looking at things. And so they start to look at strengths in their players, and of course that makes them feel better as well. So I think they're the changes the key changes they grasp that I get anyway.
Yeah. Are there key factors
Other key factors, look, I don't know, not that I can really think of. I really think it's that once you're exposed to some of the information and you've got a model to follow that you can grasp, but you can also see the benefits based on performance and well-being. So that performance and well-being mix is the real key, so that they can justify their coaching position and at the same time do what they came into coaching. So people come into coaching to help people, but to do coaching you have to perform, and by having that mix I think they get a really good, their sense of self is really connected, and they really feel like they're doing what their job is and what they want to do, and so they really feel very comfortable in the sense. But there's no obviously the way you present, the way you train people is really important, and I've been training people for a long time, so it's something that I do, but I think that the material is also really powerful as well. But you're right, if you came in there and delivered it in a different way and you didn't get them, listen to the coaches and get their feedback and work with them, it wouldn't work. You've got to, and every coach is different, so I really have to tailor it and I have to listen to them. And even in a room of coaches, all in the same club, everyone will be doing it differently. As long as they're following that basic methodology, they can do it in 100 different ways, and that's really what I'm open about. So then they'll ask a lot of questions. So a lot of it's about the questioning too. They'll say, what about this scenario? What about this? And then we workshop it as a group, because I won't always have the answer, because they're talking all these different, but then they decide what works for them, and someone else will decide what works for them, but it all follows within that structure. And because they have a structure to go in, they sort of know what parameters they can work within. So and everyone's different, every personality is different, so you wouldn't coach the way I would coach, and you've got to use your personality. So I think those are the things.
When you have to use your personality, can you say some more?
Well, I think there's everyone, the way you work with others and you get people to do what you want as a coach, everyone has different strategies and different. Some people use charisma; they're just very charismatic, and everyone wants to follow them, and they almost just use that to lift their teams. And other people are very structured in their approach and very much want to follow a structured mode, and that's the way they coach. Other people are very scientific and they really look at the physiological factors and move through that way. And other people are really just really want to connect with individuals and work with individuals, and other people are just really great at speaking to the group and motivating them. So if that's the way they coach, that's the way they coach. Stick to your strengths. Again, we're focusing on the strengths even there. That do what you do that works, and someone else will do a completely different thing in a different coaching, but that still works. Obviously it'll resonate differently with different players, but that's not what I'm looking at. I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at then their approach and sort of packaging their approach, not changing their... It's a frame of referencing, not changing their approach. Right. And it works with all the different coaches. This is the really interesting thing, that that charismatic coach that just has got it and just makes people follow them, follows this and it just works really well. And they, while the sort of systematic coach will follow this and they love it because it's very systematic, and they'll go through, and then more of an individual person who works in individuals as a coach, that works really well for them as well, because you can break it down at all the different levels. So it seems to work with all the different styles of coaching, men and women, juniors and seniors. So it seems to, because people then capture that very simple model and then can use their style on it. So I'm not restraining the way they coach, because if you do that I don't think it works. I think they lose their essence of what made them a good coach, which I'm not trying to do from a sports perspective. I mean, sport's so emotional. I mean, it's an emotional, and it's a science and an art linked together, and so we can't measure it all. So sports coaching is a bit different.
And then what are some of the effective factors that have to do? What happens in the players that makes a difference?
I'm not sure. Certainly the players themselves as a group get behind it. Initially a small core will say, yeah, this is great. It's really important is as I said, I have them without the coach in the room, and I need the people that don't agree to speak. I'm not trying to, because then you have the discussion, the argument, whatever, about, and they'll argue their case. Quite strong arguments saying that they should be able to abuse their teammates because that is what you do to motivate people. Really, really strong, quite coherent arguments, and you'll debate it through and you'll work it through, but you've got to let them say that, because unless you have that discussion in the room first, that person's still thinking that when they walk out.
Yeah.
So I have to draw that out. So it's really important not to there's a certain third that just love the concept, but I suspect they love everything. And then there's a third that are anti everything, and you've got to really work them. And then there's another group in the middle too who've got some really just small arguments. You've got to get everyone to draw that out. So I really take the time to allow people to say things and talk it through, and I don't let the other members of the team shout them down, because the team mentality is that you don't think individually, and so they don't like that. But I like to draw out that, because then we talk it through, and then we look at science, and we look at performance, and we look at why, and I actually ask them, is it appropriate if I'm at work and someone is photocopying something for me and they muck it up, should I just scream at them and throw the bit of paper at their feet and scream at them and then abuse them in front of everyone else? Is that appropriate? And they would say no, and you say, well, you're at work, so it isn't appropriate, and it isn't just not, isn't it? I don't come here at work and someone makes a mistake and you start screaming at them that you've got a typo in this document and throw it at them. It may have happened in the past, I suppose, but it's not appropriate. So it's not appropriate in the sports field as well. It doesn't matter in context. So we really talk about that, and that's my view with the coaches as well. But the players tend to be the ones who think that they can yell. The coaches may yell, but wouldn't think they really do. It's a different. Yeah. The players actually argue that case. So that's their main one. Other than that, they get it, and really explaining process praise, really explaining. I go through a number of scenarios of process praise and then get them to put up scenarios, and what's the difference between strategy error and just a skill error, making sure they really understand that, because sometimes that can be blurred, and then talking about the words they'll use and scripting them up for them. Yeah. But then it's very simple. I mean, remember, we're meant to be centering the ball. Is your reminder strategy, or great job trying to get great job getting to that ball even though you drop the mark or whatever. So that process, but really the other one is just how important it is their job to make everyone else play well. And if they get that to happen, you don't have to worry about their performance, because someone else is worrying about their performance. Yeah. So once we get that concept, the good players really feel relieved. It's really interesting, but yeah, it's really important that you don't need to worry about your performance, because that's someone else's job. You worry about other people's performance, and what we really create that team mentality. But the really important thing is to allow them to argue. Yeah. I'm not dictating, and the same with the coaches. Everyone discusses, we workshop, it's a workshop. People can criticise the research, criticise me, argue what I'm saying. Some people are pretty firm in that, but it's a matter of just staying calm and explaining it and talking it through, and not allowing other people in the room to then shout people down. Yeah. Because once you've had the discussion, it's really interesting, because you almost get, okay, agreed, we'll do it. But if you let that go, if you try and just do that on the field with people not agreeing, it won't work as well. So it's really important to have the discussion without the coach in the room too, because often people are disagreeing, but then they really just say they don't like the coach. So and I also explain the new coaching strategy and what the coaches are studying and how that's going to work, so that they get it. So I treat the athletes like adults, or like people who are intelligent, and explain the whole process and the science behind it. So it's important they understand that, because they need to, under pressure, they need to believe it. Yeah. Again. Yeah. But I especially talk to them a lot more about resilience, optimism, about maintaining performance, all the science showing pessimistic athletes drop performance under pressure, and that they have the power to control whether they're pessimistic or optimistic in the way they respond all the time, and that it'll show up. If they're not as good a team as another team, you'll still lose. But in those close games under pressure, the optimistic team will win, and the pessimistic team will lose. And so I'm not saying you suddenly become great players, but you'll win the games you should win. Yeah. And if you do that most seasons, you are performing at your optimum level. And so different groups take longer. Some are really convinced, but usually we're talking an hour or two discussion. Right. With some science and things, and usually finish off with some kind of motivational video and get them all pumped up. And we usually rock straight out to training. Yeah. And then they do it, even if it's only a half an hour session, to give the coaches a chance. Yeah. So ideally I've trained the coaches for the day, see the players for an hour, then we'll observe a training session the next day, and then review with the coaches the next day. Yeah. And you review with the players 2 weeks later and the coaches 2 weeks later. Yeah. And we usually, if I'm doing the research, we'll survey the players and coaches beforehand and then 2 weeks later, and then maybe 6 months later, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, but yeah, I like to get them out and actually doing it straight away. We've got it in their mind, and really get the coaches to encourage the players to identify people who are doing what we're asking them to do.
Yeah.
That's their first step in the process for the coaches. It seems to work all right, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, different groups.
Yeah.
And, you know, everything, you adapt. You have to adapt. And so, but basically that would be a 1.5 days training will work for most groups, and then 2 weeks later to follow up and iron out anything. And I talk to them I follow up during the week, and so they sometimes video their games and show me as well. We go through them. Yeah, which is good.
So other people wanted me to ask a question about how coaches should develop or could develop. So how do you develop, or how do you tell other people that they can develop as?
Yeah, look, I suppose I look at the research as it comes out, but I like to look at also the research from other areas. You know, so I got it from the education, but just what's happening in business, what's happening there in positive psychology, what's happening with the army now. I think that they've just done some awesome research with the training the army in the States, and there's some interesting things about who became the leaders. And it was those who had compassion for themselves and compassion for others, I think was the research. So then you look at that and you think there's got to be something there in sport. How can we link it? So even if there's not sports research out specifically, actually looking at what other psych researchers, and then can I just add an extra bit to what we're doing? And you know, and it's not like there's a cap on how much I can teach them or what I can teach, and the balance. And so as I get more information, I reframe it. I'm looking at a lot of the happiness stuff, especially for female teams. That really resonates well with. So I'm thinking of adding a bit more of that in there. Elite teams like more performance stuff, but sometimes that comes from the corporate region. Junior teams, some of the education stuff works really well. So I like to not just, I'm using a lot of sports research for the core stuff, but I like to use the other bits. I suppose that's how you develop it. If you're just looking in sport, the research isn't always there, but the concept's the same. The coach is your manager, players are your staff. If you're in an organisation, teacher, students, it really flows really well. Yeah. I've actually found the reverse. As I said, I've done some work with corporates that people have just asked me to come in, and I've said, well, I'm sports, so it's all going to be sports. No, yeah, but they got it. And they would be the coach, and they got the same principles. And in some ways, going the other way, it really softened it because it was all sports related. When you're telling a CEO, completely reframe the way they speak to people, but we're talking about a sports coach, so it's like a mythical character. They took it on better, right? Than if you just tell them, you know. So, I like to look. So building it, I reckon research is the key. I reckon positive psychology's got a lot of out there, and it's just growing so fast. From developing the coach's point of view, I think that coaches do a lot of professional development. They're always trying to develop themselves, but what they're always developing, in my view, is their technical skills. Yeah. And in Australia, we fund a lot of technical development, but we don't develop people skills. And it's the people skills that are going to keep kids in the sport, keep people with high well-being, make sure everything goes really well, because the technical skills, people become so, sometimes I shouldn't say people, many coaches become very removed from the people as they become more technically competent. Yeah. So if you're an athletics coach, you get better and better and better until you're so technically expert that the players become the athletes just become a robot that you're following your expertise for. And I think we need to keep developing the people skills, and that's the sort of the positive psychology side. And we don't do that in Australia. We don't fund that at all. Right. It's not in the coaching courses. There's a little bit of leadership, but there's not really people skills, and that's something that I want to change. I'm now in the cricket coaching course and the football coaching course is around Australia now. We're just doing just a 1 hour set, but it gives them a chance to start to think differently. Yeah. And we want to do a little bit more of that as well, just infiltrate through the actual technical coaching courses as well. But the coaches do a lot of professional development. Yeah. It's just that what there's always about. Cricket, you probably don't know much about cricket, but it's like baseball. So imagine a pitcher in baseball. The 3 sessions they had in the coaching was about identifying the errors in the bowler or the pitcher. So they had a whole session on identifying what people were doing wrong, and maybe that should be changed into looking at what are people doing, what are the good people doing, what are they doing right, because the good athletes play to their strengths every single time they go out. And they're allowed to because they're the best players. No one limits what they do. The best players just play to their strengths. And that's what everyone should be doing. Just play to your strengths and you'll do it well. So we should be looking at what do people do well. But we actually spend a lot of time at coaching, not always, but a lot of time looking at let's identify the weaknesses here. Because that's the way we've evolved in the coaching. I wonder whether that's because coaching is developed by men and not women, but it'd be interesting. Yeah. So it was interesting. So it's really a fixed problems approach, and we've just got to change that mindset. Yeah.
Yeah. Would the way that you work be different if you didn't know anything about positive psychology?
Oh yeah, look, my whole thing's been developed on positive psychology. So I wasn't working to train coaches specifically. I saw the research in education. My kids were at school. I looked at it. There was some involvement there with the changing schools, and I saw that, and I thought this works with sports. So then I had a bit of a look, and Martin Seligman research and others was just there, but quite easily to access. And I'm just going, this is amazing. So then it just happened to a particular school wanted me to come out and develop a positive psychology. I was no expert in positive psychology at all, so I thought I'd better do some research then. So then I found I couldn't teach it because in my mind I needed something to teach them in the end. So then I had to create my own models and designs and sort of evolve from there. So yeah, this is based on the science of positive psychology, and that's where it's come from. That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to put positive psychology into coaching. It didn't exist before that. So it's like it's my fourth job. So it's an extra job that I'm doing, and it's based on positive psychology, and I just think it's pretty good fun too. I'm really happy with the concepts of positive psychology. It's a little bit addictive because this is pretty good. There's some good things going on there. So I can see that I'll be able to develop the raft of things. The whole organisational change thing is my big pitch to it. I know I'm pretty sure it's a Martin Seligman thing as well. You've got to make organisational change to make it really concrete within the organisation. So although I'm working with individual coaches, I'm really keen on taking that whole sports organisation and changing, what I'm picturing as the 4 pillars of the organisation and changing them so that it becomes permanent. Because once you do that, it doesn't matter which coach comes in, they're coming into a positive situation, and they do that. Rather than the coach leaving and then the organisation's culture changes again, which we do have a propensity to have, the culture within the organisation, because in our professional sports, or even in our big, we'll have big clubs here that are just completely volunteer based, but they might have 150 teams of 20 people. It's a lot of people within a small little local club, all run on volunteer basis. If you can change that culture and keep it that way, it doesn't matter who comes in and out, you're not just changing all the time. And so that's what I'm really interested in as well, big cultural changes. And so hopefully if I can get this longitudinal research and we can really show a lot of the depth of it, it'll be pretty compelling from a government point of view. But the governments are interested straight away.
Right.
It does fit with their policy of participation. So they're less from a well-being aspect, but more in a retaining people in the sports, especially kids, keeping people in the sports, and it fits along those lines as well. So, as I said, the Victorian and South Australian government are both interested now, which would be good if we can get something moving along those lines.
Some people want me to ask about so what can they say is special about this? When you put positive psychology into coaching, what is that? Special or different, or like what could they say afterwards?
Yeah, look, I suppose this is what I'm doing. I'm adding positive psychology to coaching, and I really think the special part of it is, firstly, the coach will have longevity. A coach could stay in a club and their voice isn't going to become stale, because every time they're talking, they're building strengths, and so their athletes are feeling creative, they're feeling enthusiastic, they're feeling like they're taking challenges and risks, and so I think the coach won't get stale. So positive psychology really adds a huge dimension there. And from an athlete point of view, very few athletes go on to be professional athletes. So if you're looking through this pathway, what we're looking to do is build life skills. And in Australia, sport is so culturally important, and we want everyone to feel like they can play sport. You don't have to be good, and from a health point of view, that's really important as well. I think positive psychology gives you that, because if people aren't always focused on performance, you just get performance, but we're building well-being. People feel good about doing it.
Yeah.
People already feel good about sport for a number of reasons, but sometimes it wears you down if you're playing in a competition 3 or 4 years, 5 years. Sometimes people change sports or stop just because they're worn out. And I think if you're always looking at your strengths and that sort of stuff, I think you'll probably stay in sport longer.
Yeah.
Which I'd like to, as we talked off camera, I really would like to see people playing sport to their 80s.
Yeah.
There's no reason, it doesn't have to be football, but people should be competitive, have that team environment, that connectiveness in the community. They can be on the committees, they can really feel part of it, and by looking at people's strengths all the time, I think we can keep them. But I do like, my job is right now is to add that positive psychology element, and I reckon it's really good for sport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there things we've not talked about that are important to understand the way that you work?
I think we've talked about a fair bit, and I think you're right. Yeah.
And what advice would you give to other people who want to start putting positive psychology into coaching?
I think that it's a thing that should happen, but you've got to get the people on board. You've got to explain them through a science-based approach. You can't just say positive psychology is really great. Let's all look at the positives, and we're seeing a little bit of that in Australia now, where people are sort of and just doing one little bit. So looking at one little bit of research and then changing one bit of your coaching style, because it's no good if you just change this little bit over here, but you're doing all the sort of negative over this side. I think it's really important to the coach. You've got to really cover the whole research so that the coach changes their mindset. It's a mindset change. It's not a action change. You don't have to change one little bit. And when you look at the research, you can easily just look at one bit of research and go, oh, I'll just change this one thing. You've got to look at the research as a whole. And when you put that together, it's a mindset change that's really important. I think if you're just changing a little bit, I don't think it'll add much value. I think that's just another technical skill. You're really adding a technical skill, but I reckon you've got to change the mindset to get performance. Yeah. And it's got to be, and I don't think you'll get that performance or well-being if you don't change the whole mindset. So then you're not getting the benefits, so it's kind of pointless.
Right, right. Other advice?
I suppose just look at the research, talk to the other colleagues around the place, and if you're an individual coach, there's probably a fair bit out there that's positive psychology is, people are really open with their materials, so there's usually materials available. I've got a website, people can just go to it.
And the website where they can find the models?
That's positivsportscoaching.com.au.
Right.
So they can go on there, and there's some of my research, there's information, and they're welcome to grab those models off and have a go at using them. It's I really want people to have a go and use them in their context, and see if they can get some change in their place,
Yeah.
But it's.
And did you have anything else in the folder that?
I don't think I've got that's the 4 pillars which you can print off as well.
Right. Yeah.
And that's got a number of strategies for each of the pillars: the coaches, athletes, administration, and supporters. And you can just print that off and get you started. So with those models and there's a bit of other information on there, and you can print off the research that I've done. You can get started. You can have a go at doing one, and then look at other information. But you could do it. There's people I know who have just printed that off and coached that way, and it's made a significant change.
Right.
So it's not that hard to have a go at. So people can do that as well. Yeah.